So we've discussed game mechanics. We've discussed new alliances and how they fare. Um, we've discussed treaties and current conflicts. Um, hmm. Is there anything else that I guess that's happening in the game right now which most people don't see or that you might find interesting?
Um, well, actually, you did ask me a two-parter question earlier, I think, about where I think the game is going, and I focused on the mechanics, and that's kind of just
Yes,
taken the whole conversation in that direction.
it
But I suppose
did.
I can speak on the politics. It's a lot harder because obviously there's OBSEC, but also you don't know. I'm going to try and weave. I'm going to try and I'm going to talk about the politics, but I'll also sort of lay out where I think the meta could go and should go,
Hmm.
and some of the problems I have, I guess, with people right now, which should be in. This might be the most spicy part of the conversation because I'm going to say some
Awesome.
unpopular things probably.
I'm looking forward to
Time
it.
to heat it up, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've noticed there's a mindset in the game now that the game's dying, which is, that's been the case for as long as I can remember. The game is dying has been passed in a sense, in the sense that there's always something that's going worse about the game at any given point. Um, but I kind of want to address, I guess, the nap stuff, talk about dog piles, all of this sidelines without really doing anything. But I'm not even going to roast them. I'm just going to sort of lay out, I guess, a thesis. Before we do that, let me roll back the clock a little bit and lay out a bit of history because there's a lot of people who have not played the game for as long as you and I
Hmm.
probably don't remember a time for
Uh,
or
your Wi-Fi is.
multipolarity where we had bipolarity, and all of them back to bipolarity would not be a good thing,
Mm.
seems. But I think people perhaps don't necessarily know how to guess. Oh, I'm cutting. How's it going now? Is it
I think it's
smooth or
better
is it
now.
cut out? All right.
It dipped for a
Okay.
little bit there, but now it's back.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yes. What part did you hear? Of what I
So you were
said?
saying they haven't seen bipolarity.
Yes. Yeah. I think most people probably just reputationally know that it's not a good thing. Especially if the goals of what people are saying they want are true, which I question that sometimes. Bipolarity is not great. Bipolarity was a very small few alliances directing the whole game, and you had basically almost no agency as a smaller alliance. The only agency you had was to switch sides. That was the whole game basically. Is you have the major groups, and then smaller alliances would switch sides every now and then, and that was the whole game. And so it wasn't a good thing, and no one should be in a rush to go back to it, and no one should be in a rush to incentivize it. I don't think we're going there though, so that's fine. I don't think we're at that point, or will be for a while, so I'm not too concerned about it. But I did want to talk about multipolarity and requ- what what is needed for it to work in the way that people want it to work. Because people have a lot of complaints, right? Like they don't like dog piles. This is the common one, which is everyone is dogpiling everyone. There's not a single major alliance that hasn't dogpiled someone or tried to dogpile someone. That's another key thing. In the last year or two, right? Everyone's done it, but people are very selective about when they care. And for the average player, they probably complain every time. But the issue is you can't treat dogpiling as its own.
You disconnected again. That's rough. Welcome back.
We're back again. Yeah, in the
So,
past year, every grouping has at some point consolidated to a degree. Like, okay, let's use Florida for example. So a lot of people tried to argue that Florida was this massive, gross consolidation, which if you looked at the numbers at the time until Sing merged, that wasn't true. It was the smallest grouping. I mean, it had more upper tier than some other groupings, but it wasn't the biggest grouping by any means. And then Sing merged, and that flipped things and made it bigger. And what people never talk about though is that before that happened, before Kata left Odoo would have been the biggest fear, right? Like Odoo would have had Kata and Grumpy and TKR and all the bigger Penta alliances that they still have now. So they would have
and Katie.
been huge. And then after that, we had Cell. Yeah. Oh, KT at that point? Did they? No, I don't
Yep.
think they. Oh, they had him with an ODP, but I'm going to give
no
him
one
the
else did.
leniency and say that doesn't. Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. To me, if you have an ODP, to me, you're basically just floating. If you have an MDP, then yeah, I'd agree. But I mean, you can make the argument. It depends on what they do as well. Like it's an action based thing and those sort of things. But I see your point. I wouldn't have counted KT. But they were the biggest grouping in the game at that point. And then, so there was a lot of pressure to disband Florida. Multiple people made claims during Dodge This that was the biggest fear in the game. And that it was like a gross like consolidation. And it was like marginally bigger than some of the other groups. And then, soon as we did, they all consolidated into a massive sphere. TKR consolidates Grumpy and then TI into the grouping. And so it's like, why should anyone listen to this concern if there's no consistency? You either want small spheres or you want big spheres. Those are your options. People need to make a choice. You can't complain when people consolidate and then when they follow your concerns and break up, you then consolidate more. And people like to make these arguments like, oh, but you're still working together. We wouldn't have to work together with people if the spheres were even or close to even, right? The reason that consolidation connects to dog piles is because in order to fight a sphere that is bigger than you need more numbers from outside your sphere. If I have a sphere that's whatever, let's just assume even tiering. I have 300 people, you have 600 people. I need another group to be able to roll you. And this is the game that's played. This is the shell game, is people consolidate these big spheres that you can't fight one-on-one, and then you have to go get another sphere. But the problem is you can't balance that out once you go get another sphere, right? Because if you go get another sphere, that sphere is a certain size, your sphere is a certain size. There's only so much you can do to even that out, right? Obviously, we didn't even try last war, but I'll get into that in a bit. If you want an even war to happen, you have to have evenly sized spheres, and then if two spheres gang up on one sphere, another sphere has to come in to counter that. That's the only way you can have a system like that. I'm of the opinion it's probably not going to be possible. There's too many political actors in the game that don't actually want it for it to even happen, and so it's like, why even try? But there's an inconsistency. You have to call out consolidation if you don't want there to be dog piles, because they're hand in hand. and you have to be consistent. You can't complain about dog piles when they happen to you and then do them yourself and not complain about it. You have to be consistent in what you say. I've been consistent in my opinion that I don't care anymore because no one else does, really. If people started care, I'd love the game to go back to a more even playing field and people play more. I'd like smaller spheres. I think that'd be more interesting. But it's not going to happen because people don't want it to happen. They only want it to happen when it's in their interests for it to happen, and then every other time they're doing the exact opposite. If we slim down tomorrow, like if Singularity went paperless tomorrow, other people would take numbers, consolidate, and then they'd roll us. That's exactly what happens. So that's the situation in the game. Then you have the long nap discussion. Long naps are not as much of a problem in multipolarity. This is another thing. It's like people complain about a 6-month nap, for example. A 6-month nap during a bipolarity means no one fights for 6 months, right? But in multipolarity, a 6-month nap is just these people won't fight each other. It leaves you room to fight other people. It leaves room for other people to fight other people. If you actually look at the amount of wars that have happened over the past, 2 years, there's more wars happening every year than there was in the past. And that's because of multipolarity. Naps don't really impact that. And you also have to be consistent in your complaints. If your issue is that wars are predictable, that being, oh, we're always fighting the same people all the time, or it's Eclipse versus TKR again. Ooh, we've seen that before. The only way that really is going to stop is if they sign a long nap. And it still might not stop, right? But the only way either of them is going to have an opportunity to fight someone else. Either it's diplomacy and a reset, which is very difficult at times to do, or you're going to need a long nap. Those are the realities. So there are too many conflicting things that people want where they don't really, they're not consistent. You need to have a consistent stance on all these positions, I think. Are you
So
still there?
I am sorry. I have two questions. I was gonna let you talk and explain it, and
Yeah, good. I
I
just want to
have
make
two
sure
questions
we're
derived
cutting
from
out.
it.
Yeah, sure.
Number one I have is about the hypocrisy. That's the term I prefer over consistency, although consistency as a way more
Oh, yeah.
diplomatic answer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
So currently Eclipse, to me, as an outsider, that looks like a supersphere. That looks like something abnormal. And is that basically justified by the hypocrisy of your enemies?
Yes.
Is that...
Yes, it is. I think so. I'll be blunt with you and say that, look, if people want things to change, they have to hold the people who are creating the system accountable. And look, you can point fingers in 20 different directions. The reality is, when we had a big sphere and people thought that the sphere was too big, we broke it up. You know what the response to us breaking that up was? When we got into a situation where we got rolled, people were like, well, you guys are bad at FA. Well, okay, so you've just told me that doing the right thing and splitting up a sphere, the only reward for that is to get rolled and then have people criticize that decision as bad FA. Well, fine, I'll start doing good FA. Look where we are now. It wasn't hard. Turns out when you actually try, it's not that difficult to regain your position.
To play devil's advocate, though, which is a hard thing to do considering TKR has coined the term hypocrisy. But their spheres or the other spheres in the game are kind of split up with the exception of Rose. Like TS let TKR get rolled, low-key backstabbed them. EVH did the same to TS. They kind of are the most split that they've been in quite a while.
To be fair, I think it's worth noting, we also got rolled in isolation as well. The only difference is we were able to go to these alliances and convince them to come in by cutting a deal. And this is one of the things that really does kind of annoy me, is people have tried to recast that whole one-day war scenario as us being rescued. We were already rolled at that point.
Yeah.
The only thing we were being rescued from is the peace terms, which, like, whatever. Like, the reality is a deal was struck. Everyone knows what that deal was, including the people who were standing to lose from that deal. I probably won't say it, but
I'm
you
trying
can
to
figure.
remember
I
what
mean,
it was.
I think you might know, but
I'm pretty sure I know.
I think
If I
a
can
lot of
remember it, I can leak it.
people can connect the dots. It's not a difficult thing to figure out on if you're just paying any attention at all.
I don't
So
think
I
I
say there was a deal.
okay. I was gonna say if I don't
That,
face a penalty for leaking it, I might as well do it. But if I remember correctly, it was that it was so convoluted. We're going to roll PS and Eclipse, and then after the war, things would just sort of reset or whatever. But then Eclipse and TKR, or TS and TKR, made a deal, and TKR was going to. Damn, it was so annoying. God damn it! But yeah, I remember the nap thing made way more sense.
The functional thing is everyone who signed on to that war on our side had a reason. They had a gain that they were gaining from doing so.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not even going to shit on them for this. It was contentious. We had our dramas with it, but I would say it's over now. It's not. We have other reasons to be angry at certain alliances, but that's not really the focus. But the point is, everyone had a gain to get from that war, and to hear it be pitched as like a saving of us is another one of these things where it's like, no, we made a move. We put together a bunch of people in a room to make a deal that would work for us and for them, and that's how good deals work. Is everyone gains something from them. But then that deal was not followed through in execution, and so ultimately it didn't happen the way that it was set out, but it would have if it was followed through on. And that's everyone knows, all the major alliances know what that means. Point being, we were not rewarded for doing the right thing. And so there's a question there, which is, okay, we can continue to do it. And this is what we did in past. This is how we changed the meta last time. CGH changed the meta, Hedog by extension, and made minispheres happen by just doing it and just sticking to it. And when we faced adversity, we stuck to it. We didn't deviate from that course, and it worked. And so you could make the argument, and some people have privately made this argument to me, and I understand their position, which is that, well, if we just keep doing it, if we keep upholding this meta, eventually things will change. The issue is the power structure in the game is different than it was then. Hedog was a small sphere, but it packed a mean punch, and at that point in the game, that was enough to change the meta. Now, the game is so huge and so consolidated, and there's so few avenues to change things. There's enough consolidated power in the mages that if the mages decide they don't want to do it, it's tough luck. You're not changing anything.
I agree, but if for example EVH, TGS, and TKR sign an MDP right now, they somewhat match your consolidation, and I mean they could totally justify that based on what you guys are doing right now, and they could say, well, we did try and split, and
of course, but they didn't try to split. The thing is, they didn't really. Well, okay, EVH and TS split. The problem is this is the other thing, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of the EVH because I think we're in a better spot now. But you can't pick and choose when something's convenient to you. You can't say, okay, well now, like, you can't consolidate, use the power structure, and then split. And people will say, oh, well, you could say the same about Fortuna. Fortuna was the big power structure. Florida was built to beat Fortuna, which was the actual consolidated power at the time. And then after taking out Fortuna, we became the power after a merge, which, the timeline too of that is interesting. We merged, and our intention was to split from Florida, which I don't know what the timeline would have been on it, but it would have been probably before any wars could happen. It would have been within a month of us merging. The issue was we found out very early on that TKR was planning to hit Rose. At the time, TKR's plan to hit Rose would have been Kata, Grumpy, TKR, and all TKR's extras versus a Florida that at the time didn't have Kata. So it would have been a massive dogpile, right? We evened the numbers out by taking Kata and merging it into Sing. And then the narrative becomes, oh, well, Florida's the biggest fear. But Florida's only the biggest fear because we stopped your dogpile on us and flipped it. Right? That's the thing. And then even then after that, we split the sphere up. We recognized that it was too big, which was always the intention. And so we split it up. I would have much preferred if TKR didn't plot to hit Rose so that I could just leave. Because for me, at least, once I've found out that someone's plotting to hit my ally, and like, there's like once I know that there's a firm plan in place that they've made the decision to come after, I can't leave at that point.
I have a
If I'd
question
not
more
known,
about current events as well. So
yeah,
because that stuff, I know it's the turning point, and that's where like most of the arguments now can be derived. But it's very esoteric for a lot of other players because they weren't super involved, or they weren't watching it that closely because they didn't think it was that important at the time. Nowadays, though, I have a question about. I don't want you to reveal all your war plans, but if I was in, say, EVH's shoes or TS's shoes, creating like another block to rival you guys might seem like more of a natural move, and it could be justified. But if they do
I'm
that,
sure TS
they lose.
would want to do that.
Yeah, but if they do that, they lose. And if they just remain divided, you guys are kind of forced to dogpile them again, or to dogpile Rose. Like you're not. It's not. It's a weird position to be in. I guess.
Yeah, I think it'll be. Here's the thing. I know that if we split, they will consolidate. I know that. I think I'll do it anyway. I know they will. So it's like, why? Why even? And the thing, I'm open to any sort of moves with any. Like we work with alliances. Like this is the thing. You can work with alliances outside your block on hits, right? Like we Eclipse didn't hit Syndicate with us. We worked with Rose to hit Eclipse. There's no reason why I can't work with TKR to hit someone or EVH. Probably not TS because we're not on the greatest of terms. It's funny because I had wondered if Last War would be the end of that beef, and then the forum stuff come out and all the arguments happened, and I realized maybe it's not going to be. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe they'll reset. I'm skeptical, but it is what it is. I'll hold my breath on that, which is why 6 months is good. Because otherwise, what's the alternative? All right, we fight TS again in 3 months if we still have a beef by that point. The longer you have a peace, the more likely that something like that happens as well. Because a reset takes time. You can't. The problem with resets too is when you've been fighting the same foe for so long, there is a level of distrust that is high. And there's always that sort of sense of like, well, they are resetting with us, but are they really? Or is this just a ploy? And in a short turnover, that's not going to go away. It's going to take a long time for that to happen. So, and if you're at 6 months peace, that's 2 cycles essentially. So that gives you a cycle to potentially fight someone else. I would rather not fight DS, every single 3 months. But at the same time, who do I fight now? I don't know. There's not a lot of options. It's really going to come down to whether the shifts in spheres happen. Will we? Will we be with Eclipse forever? I don't know. Like, going to be dependent on the game. I would like to see a smaller spheres happen, but I just don't believe they will. I don't believe that people are incentivized to do it. I don't believe that the majors want to do it. I think that consolidation is going to continue to happen. And I think last time we tried it, we learnt a lesson. And so it's like, you have to incentivize me to do it at this point. You can't just complain, because why would like all the same like people, like I call them the peanut gallery. They don't like it. I don't care. But all the same people who yap and yap and yap about the problems of the game and long naps and shit. When the shoe is on the other foot, they're the same people clowning on you for losing. They don't incentivize anything. No one. Higos made a good point on Ron, which I'm not on Ron, but people pass me messages on Ron all the time, so I'm aware of the conversations that happen there. And Higos made a great point, I thought, when he said that you need to reward alliances for doing the right thing, or they're not going to do the right thing. We tried to do the right thing, and not only were we not rewarded, we were punished severely for it. Eclipse recently, there are a lot of fair criticisms to Eclipse's strategy, I think. Their nap strategy, you definitely can criticize it. The one thing I won't criticize is that last war, when they fought TKR, they intentionally set it up to be a close war to their own detriment. And that's a whole other separate conversation, actually, about game mechanics and how the current nuke meta that's just been created incentivizes dogpiles. That's a whole other
I don't
tangent.
know if they
Maybe
did
we can
set
go
it
there
up to be
later.
a close war on that one. I mean, there were
They did.
some
Again,
decisions.
define close. The thing is, you're never going to get a perfectly even war. The reality is, at the time, they had disadvantages in certain tiers and advantages in certain tiers. And,
If I remember
those
correctly, I think
advantages.
they limited EVH's participation to Pentaforce, and then you guys signed Pentaforce. If I remember correctly, that's what happened. And that was
I
to the extent
don't
they
think
limited.
they had anything to do with EVH's.
Then I don't think
Pentaforce
they limited the conflict.
They did. They did. They definitely limited the conflict. Let's put it that way. It could have gone a very different way.
Fair.
They did what they could to limit the conflict. They kept certain parties out that could have been in, and they gave them what will be a close fight. And people will say, well, it wasn't a close fight. Well, there's a skill disparity there. The reality is, Eclipse almost lost that war. If Grumpy had really pushed and showed up and done the job, they would have won. Their side would have won. I mean, I have no beef with Grumpy, but they do have a problem with aggression. I think lack of aggression. They're not as willing to go out and take risks as they need to be for an alliance that's in their position. When you're the big dog, you're the top guy, like you're the heavy upper tier people, you have to be on the front foot when you're fighting. You have to play aggressively. You have to use that advantage, because otherwise the people below you are just going to get swamped, and then you're going to get swamped. Which is what happened in that war. So it's unfortunate. I would have liked to have seen a closer war. It would have been interesting to see them win. As much as I'm tied to Eclipse, but it would have been interesting. But it didn't happen, and
I feel the same thing is going to repeat a lot, though. I think Eclipse's strategy is too good. I think they kind of their success is almost built off taking advantage of other alliances not doing very good balancing.
I don't agree. I think this is the common misconception of the game. This one's going to get me in big trouble, because I'm about to probably say some negative things about my ally and another major, but in for a penny, Yeah. So I don't think their strategy is a winning strategy. I think they've gotten very lucky to a lot of degree. They're very good. They're very savvy players. I'll give them that. They're very good. They know what they're doing. But they've also almost lost once, and they did lose another time. And I feel a lot of their strategy relies on bad decisions by other alliances, and in particular one alliance, the big orange one. They've made some calculated errors when they shouldn't have. I think they may even do it again. Who knows? We'll see. I have no idea what the play is there, but Dodge, this was a mistake for TKR. TKR's priority after Fortuna should have been going to Rose, mending those bridges as much as possible, because they had just been in a situation where it was almost going to go bipolar, and the one alliance that flipped and actually fought Fortuna was Rose, and they targeted Rose, and that's just it was a horrible decision. And signing Grumpy while doing that was even worse. Like, you don't sign Grumpy, the nemesis of Eclipse, and then go and take them and fight someone else. As soon as they signed Grumpy, it was obvious that their move was to fight Eclipse. But they didn't. They fought us, and that bit them in the ass. They burned a bunch of bridges with us that they've never fully been able to repair. That's a whole other conversation. I'm not going to get into that one. And they hurt themselves, and Eclipse won because of that. But then they fixed that problem. They actually did with One Day War. Issue is they didn't follow through. That's the problem. We would have won that war. I mean,
Yeah.
I've talked to Eclipse about it, which we signed, and they agree.
Grumpy would have been in a very nice
that was a
position,
win.
yeah.
We had them. We had them because the thing is, like, yes, it was dicey. Rose was in a rough spot when Eclipse came in, but
then at least TKR
we
and Grumpy
had
would have been
them-
on Rose and Singularity's side of that. It would be Eclipse and TS against them for a long time.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't think things are that easy to solidify. I think it's entirely possible that wouldn't have been the case. But the reality is, they would have they wouldn't have got rolled by Eclipse twice. That's for sure. Or was it? I think I might have been after. So once again, yeah. Because the reality is, in that war, I was watching it from my I do a lot of MA, like top level MA, just like making sheets and things to help with the war. And I was looking at the sheet, and Eclipse was struggling to get people online counter because they were all asleep because they're Europeans. Like, most of them were asleep. They didn't see it coming. They had no advance notice that war was going to take place because we managed to keep it from leaking, which is a miracle. We had them by the balls, and all it would have taken is for the plan to be continued upon and executed, but it wasn't. And so the result of that was we did this big nap. I did it. I wasn't a fan of it. People have pointed out that I wanted a longer nap, but I didn't want the nap. I wanted to keep fighting. Once it became clear that we had to have a nap, I wanted a longer nap because we'd just been fighting for 4 months. So I wasn't too keen to have another short turnaround at that point. But
do you think Grumpy has sort of doomed itself then? Because if I was like in Rose's shoes or Syndicate's shoes, yeah, I don't see them being able to form another coalition with someone and like actually be able to challenge Eclipse. And Eclipse has no incentive at this point to really let them go.
Yeah, well, yeah. The issue for Grumpy is when you make these. I mean, it's not Grumpy's fault really. The handling of that war was to a degree, but again, I think these are TKR's mistakes, and Grumpy's mistake is staying for as long as they have. To be honest, TKR might turn it around now. The fact that they've gone small this period for the first time is maybe a hopeful sign that they're learning that sometimes that just consolidating a bunch of trees isn't going to be a winning strategy for them. But I don't know. I don't know if they will or not. We'll see, I guess.
I only see them in two states, and it's tiny or super sphere, you know? they switch from one to the other.
Their general instinct when they lose is to consolidate, which I can't even criticize because I've done the same. But I didn't consolidate because we lost. I consolidated because everyone consolidated, right? Because I saw that there was no reward for not consolidating. But this is more because of my belief of how TS plays the game than TKR. If people have an opportunity now, I think, to change the meta, will they? I don't know. They do. It is there. But to sort of circle back to the Eclipse stuff, said that was TKR's mistake. Both of those things were TKR's mistake. They weren't Eclipse's move. Eclipse was smart to come into that war to just dive in. That was the best move they could have made in under the circumstances. So I'll give them that. But it was definitely more a mistake not for them to follow through on that plan, because they would not have gotten, like, there are multiple things that wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have gotten rolled again months later. They would have won a war, it's always good to win a war, not just for the fact that you don't lose, but there's also like a momentum that you gain from winning that is good. So it's always good to win for that reason. But instead, they didn't follow through with the plan, and the result was they basically got nothing out of the whole exchange. The deal was off the table because they didn't follow through. They reburnt the bridges that they had just built back by agreeing to do it in the first place, which is like, I think some people in TKRs come away with the idea that it was a mistake to join that war, and in my opinion, it was a mistake not to follow through. But take it how you will, I guess. And now the result is Eclipse has beaten them twice, and again, Eclipse seems so close to losing for good there, because let's put it this way: if Eclipse had lost that war, they would have lost the war after that war.
Yeah, 100%.
You can take whatever you want from that. So it's a good thing for Eclipse that TKR made that mistake, which is why I don't subscribe to the idea that Eclipse's strategy is inherently winning. I think the main thought that goes through most people's head in this game is, whose turn is it to lose? I don't think this way, really, but a lot of people do. And so there's never a situation where you can avoid losing for a long period of time unless people make mistakes. You don't have that much control over the game. Eclipse hasn't controlled the game to avoid losing. They've just sat back, and other people have made critical errors that have allowed them to do that. That's all that's happened. And it may continue to happen if those same people make the same critical errors. I don't know if they will or not, but
You know what's funny?
I have learned my lessons. Let's put it that way.
You know what's funny? I just realized you're making the same argument that I made in my last interview with someone else, and I know we disagree on that.
What argument is that?
Well, I think essentially, Endpolt, the only reason that happened, like at the beginning of the war, the reason you guys won, and then the reason that ultimately the other side lost, I think those were both mistakes. I think the other side in each case just made a mistake. So that's, and I know that we disagree on that. You don't think, what's it called? You don't think Coalition A made a mistake at the beginning, and I know you don't think Coalition B made a mistake at the end. But it's funny. It's just it's an interesting argument. You're right. Actually,
Yeah,
I think
I'm not sure specifically what you're talking about in terms of mistakes, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
For me, the whole IQ stuff is like just
It's
to give
interesting.
everyone an insight, I guess. You wanted to talk about that, but my thought process is like, I don't know. It's old stuff. I like
Yes.
talking about it every now and then for fun, but if I'm coming on here, I'd rather talk about the current game because there's so
Yeah.
much
Sorry.
stuff that needs
Sorry.
addressing. Oh yeah, fine.
I just mentioned it because I find it funny as like as a thought process that sometimes people attribute a lot of agency to the game, and then sometimes you don't attribute much agency. And I think you're right. I think a lot of things happen because of mistakes or just because of chance.
Well, it is agency. It's just not the agency of the people they think it is. Like TKR, I think, has been very reactive. But the one proactive move that two, if you count One Day War, the one proactive move they made was, I think, the biggest mistake that they've made in their time. Obviously, it's different leaders now. Adrian's there. Maybe they'll have a different mentality to how they lead. I don't really know. But the biggest mistake, in my opinion, was their only proactive move, which was to hit Florida. I think it was a huge critical error when you look at the lines drawn in the game. They should have taken that opportunity to reset with Rose, to fix that relationship, because Rose was the only one who had actually crossed the aisle at that point in what was increasingly becoming a bipolar conflict before that happened. So I think it was a mistake. But I think it's more, my argument isn't that things happen by chance. It's more that a lot of this isn't down just to Eclipse's agency and their strategy. It's more their strategy is to sit back has an expiry date, and that has issues. Like 1 Day War only worked because Eclipse had sat back a lot, and Fortuna's the same thing. If Fortuna had been on the front foot, they would never have gotten rolled because they had all the pieces they needed to take anyone out. They were they had Grumpy and Guardian were both under Nap, right? Which is people forget this. We rolled Eclipse and TS without Guardian and Grumpy. They didn't join the war. They were under Nap.
They were
had
in the
two
wings.
spheres. They had Florida, and then they had Odu, and it would be an understatement to say that those two spheres were not on the same page all the time. People, I don't know how people think about that, like how that came together, but it was very much two people coming together, making the decision, getting on everyone else to agree, and then it came together in a pretty fast amount of time. But they had they had all the advantages. All they needed to do was pick a target and swing, and they would have won that whole cycle into the next. They had all the pieces they needed for it. They didn't do that, and they lost. And then 1 Day War was the same thing. I think Eclipse got incredibly lucky that Grumpy and TKR made a mistake, because if they didn't do that, if they had actually followed through, Eclipse would have gotten rolled not once, but probably twice. And so, no, I don't. You have to be careful and you have to be strategic, but I don't actually agree that this strategy of sitting back really gets you anything, because everyone's going to get rolled eventually, is the reality of the game. With how everyone thinks about the game right now, everyone will be rolled. We will get rolled eventually. It could happen. It could happen in 5 months.
You're going to change Eclipse's policy? You're going to roll the whole game? The top tier leaks in the radio?
I don't think so, no. Again, I mean, we and Eclipse are very different in how we view the game, and so it makes for an interesting partnership, I suppose. But our priority is we don't see the game right now. It's ironic, really, because I don't believe in AA centrism at all, but we've kind of stumbled into doing it by way of the game being where it is. It's not. I stand by my opinion that it's terrible for, like, it's not smart for mid-tier alliances to play AA centric at all. I think only a major, I think, can get away with what we've done recently. And it'll. Maybe. I mean, we'll get rolled at some point. But that's just the price of paying business. If your focus is never getting rolled, I think you're more likely to get rolled more often on average. Because I think you'll trade wins and losses more in that scenario. If you're willing to play riskier, your risk always has greater reward in this game. Being aggressive always has greater reward. But the game isn't built for it right now. Is my honest opinion. Everyone is too afraid to make moves. Everyone is too afraid to be proactive. A lot of people pay lip service to it, but then you go to them and you talk to them, and they don't want to do it. It's like, well,
I think a big problem with the game, I was talking to someone in Rose recently, you probably know who they are, but I talked to them about how big alliances communicate, and they imparted to me that some alliances, some really big alliances, hadn't said much of anything to each other in months. And
we don't talk to Singularity Syndicate at all.
Yeah. And it's just like, how do you make decisions if you don't talk to anyone? And that was another thing I was talking to in the last interview, where I just asked the person, how much did you communicate? And they were like, we didn't communicate. And it's like, well, that's probably why mistakes were made.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, for the majors, I can't think of any majors that don't communicate with people. They may not directly communicate with some other majors. Like, we don't have a very good relationship with Syndicate, so we don't really talk to them. But that doesn't mean we don't have indirect sort of contact with same people who then give us some idea of what the other one's thinking, because we do. Everyone does in the game. So it's not. And I want to know. I mean, we talk to a lot of people, but I imagine that's true of all the majors. I think they all go around talking to people. Talking to people gets you information, but at the end of the day, the issue in the game right now is I think a lot of decisions are being made out of fear rather than out of a desire to have, I guess, an impact in the game. And it's kind of like the way the meta works is the majority decides how the game is played correctly. If the majority decides that being aggressive is the correct way to play, it becomes the correct way to play. If the majority says it's not, then it's not. And that's why we've calmed down in the last, like, when we came out, we were very aggressive. I think everyone remembers that.
Yeah. Yep.
We went to war. Obviously, we started with the war, dodge this, which would have happened regardless. Because I mean, yeah, there was a mutual fight, even though certain parties entered. But obviously, we took a side, wipe at House Stark. A lot of people think that we did that to burn infra, which is weird to me because it happened like 2 months before we were set to fight TS, before the nap ended. We definitely weren't burning infra 2 months in advance. The World Task Force stuff, yeah, that was a little bit more burning infra. It was more for fun because we wanted to just have a little bit of fun. But House Stark was purely Lysander annoyed us, and we decided we wanted to change a meta in the game. That worked, actually. Notably, there's been a lot less leaks in the game since we rolled House Stark. I've noticed, especially embarrassing ones. They've all calmed down a bit. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people criticised us at the time and said, "Oh, you can't stop the journalism and all this shit." And then in the end, we did. It's they're not doing it anymore. Lysander gave us the identity of the leaker. He didn't think he did because he thought the leaker had covered his tracks more. But with the information he gave us, we immediately went, "Oh, yeah, okay, this is the person leaking," and we yeeted them. So
That's pretty funny.
And it's like at that point, okay, it just establishes that yes, you can roll an alliance to get the identity of an leaker from a journalist, which is the precedent we wanted to set. So now, like, if someone ever put out an embarrassing leak about us again, that is exactly what we'll do again. And we're in a position where even if that alliance is protected, we can either get them unprotected, which is what we did with House Stark, put it that way, or we can just build a coalition and shift our FA strategy towards that. And the thing is, if we have a rival sphere and they leak our shit, well, that's just part of the game. That's part of war, right?
But they're neutral.
Yeah, exactly. But neutral parties are incentivized not to do that sort of thing. And this is what all these new players don't seem to get, is like leaking on people isn't a hostile act. It is an act of not war, but is an act of aggression in its own form. And you can't just go, "Oh, I'm a journalist, so it doesn't count." No, you're a member of an alliance, and in his case, he was a head of FA, so you're on the hook for that. And we chose to prosecute it, and I think that's helped change the meta on leaking, and for the better, frankly.
I think the problem with Royal
meta.
is that leaking and that sort of stuff might actually be an interesting part of the game. Like, it might be able to engage more players, but I think Royal was just an overtly political entity. Like, they were pretending to be neutral, but they were just straight out antagonistic towards you. And there were people they weren't leaking on. They were a political actor. And so I know there were a lot of people that initially wanted journalists to sort of be able to say whatever they want. I mean, I make a lot of stuff. I probably don't want to be rolled for some of it, but I go in with the expectation that I might be. But with Royal, yeah, there was a lot of people that were just like, yeah, okay, fair play.
Yeah, well, I think the thing
is very strange.
Yeah. House Stark, I'm not even going to get into House Stark as an alliance. They're very confusing to me. But yeah, I mean, the thing is with Ron, like, people have clowned on us for leaving, but our thought process with leaving is this is not a unbiased actor in the game. We consider their activities to be, opposition to us, and that was how they operated. And the thing with Lysander is he knows that he did that. A lot of people around the time were trying to say, "Oh no, they didn't actually do anything wrong," and it's like, but I know that they know they did something wrong because Lysander came to me and apologized. he did it after he was dropped by Guardian, notably. He apologized once he realized he was in the shit. Not before. Had he done it before, like if he had done it prior to that point, just one day he just comes up and says, you know what, I was maybe a bit of a dick. You know, I targeted you guys. I'm sorry about that. I don't think we would have prosecuted it. I still would probably be opposed to leaks. So again, our position is that we don't like people leaking on us, regardless of context. Doesn't matter what the leak is, we don't like it, right? How severe the leak is and how it's presented definitely impacts our response. His what he was doing at the time was taking leaks from our announcements and just dropping them into Ron Balkan's chat and pinging our members at like our golf.
Yeah.
Basically just troll like, oh, it's like, I wouldn't say we were offended by it or anything, but like if you want to step to us, you want to talk shit, like we're going to respond. You know what I mean? He brought that whole saga on himself, and I did consider at a time. There was a moment where I considered contacting House Stark and saying, "Look, he's doing all this shit. You need to stop him, or we're going to stop him." I thought about that, but I decided he was the head of FA. It was their responsibility. And to be honest, I wasn't a big fan of House Stark at that point already because of some of the other things they'd done, like the peace terms with CTO.
Oh
They're
yeah.
fucking them in Florida. I hate like them. They when we were going to go on the offensive, they said no, which fair enough. Like, they don't have to go on the offensive. They weren't in the sphere. But then when they got hit, they just sort of flopped and didn't do anything. It's like I didn't have a lot of respect for them. So it was a combination of things. I don't owe them that courtesy, and I decided I wasn't going to give it to them, and we just hit them.
I remember it going down, and we had some courtesy towards them because they, in a previous war, they have a bad history with radio shows. They're not very good at them. They every time they go on one, they leak something absolutely critical, or they say the exact same thing for about an hour. Not too much shade, but a little bit. And we had some courtesy towards them from the Nexus War because they were more polite than CTO. But that was quite a low threshold. And by the time you guys rolled them, we saw that as like, we've now passed on 3 opportunities to roll them, so our courtesy towards them is somewhat diminished. Right?
Yeah.
So you got your 3 strikes and you're out. So, yeah, we didn't have too
we
much
had a lot of
sympathy.
fun with that one. And again, that's part of it too. Back then, we were more focused on fun. People, I think it's funny. I mean, I made the big monologue against CS when we declared on them, and I think they got hyper focused on certain things I said in that, and they didn't get the overall message, which was, you guys kind of brought us into the political game when we didn't want to be in it. We were more content being reckless than we were playing the game, and it was a mistake for you to interject into our shit and bring us in, because I don't think we like. They'll disagree, but we were not really on a collision course with TS specifically. We were on a collision course with Sale because we didn't like Aurora at the time, because we had been having issues with Aurora for like so long. Like personally, I had been having issues with Aurora since I was in DB. So it was a pretty long. That's all in the past now. So we had our issues with them, and then when we finally felt like, okay, this is slowed down, we're fine now, then they started getting their issues with Cypher, and Cypher was a fucking train wreck of an alliance.
Yeah.
So many problems, but I still hold the position that some of the accusations against them by Aurora were, if not unfounded, unproven, and you can't really run amok with unproven allegations, especially when it looks like you're building a CB to use to hit them. And that's how it looked to me. It looked like they were building a CB to eventually hit them with, which means hitting me. And so I was quick to get into that conversation. Would I have, in hindsight, would I have done that? I don't know, because I've stopped getting into allies business as much in recent times. It hasn't paid off.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. I hope it goes better for you soon. There's not a lot of people value sort of the political statements nowadays. I know that people are moving towards word walls again. EVH did some, TFP did some. I think you guys probably did one in this war.
Sorry,
But
what? I missed the.
sorry,
What do we do? Sorry?
I think people are doing more word walls and they're sort of making
Oh,
more interesting
right.
arguments on the forums. EVH, TFP, Singularity. I think even TS did one. Rose, I suspect, will in future. It's interesting to see how the game will develop. We've been for the most part staying off the forums because there was a time in the game where if you actually had if you had a real argument that was actually in
Yeah.
a negative, that was something that people didn't want to listen to.
Well, I
Do you
don't
think
think that's actually
changing?
changed that much.
Okay.
No. Well, good. The leader straight into my response, which is no. I think this is another one of the issues I have with these. So there's a certain group of people. I'm not going to name them. There's well, I've given them a name already. So peanut gallery. They complain about there not being enough activity and things are happening in the game. Right. Here's the thing. What drives activity is drama. That's it. That's everything in the game is driven by drama, fundamentally. Because even if you think about it, it doesn't have to be like super toxic, over the top drama, but beefs and reasons to fight people are what drive most, if not all, of the narratives that make the game interesting. And the problem lately is people, firstly, they hold back a lot of the narratives now. No one's trying to push public narratives anymore. And a part of the reason for that is there's no incentive to do it anymore. In the past, what you had a bunch of smaller alliances led by armchair generals who weren't necessarily playing in the big leagues of FA, but they had enough numbers themselves that they were someone you had to consider when you were making decisions, if that makes sense. But now, all those people just sit in alliances as members and do nothing. And so, like, no one cares about their opinion because you have no power in the game to change or to punish for the decisions you're making. Some guy who's a low gov staffer in some random alliance going on to Ron and complaining that X alliance has done X thing or a nap too long or whatever is going to have absolutely no impact on how almost every major plays because there's no incentive for them to change their behavior. And so this is the trap now. No one pushes public narratives because there's no reason to, because there's no gain, because there's no talent in the game actually incentivizing that, and there's no talent in the game because of the retention issues, which is why it always comes back to retention with me, because I think a lot of the problems with the politics of the game, yes, it's player driven. There's a lot of, I think, questionable decisions being made, but it's also mechanics driven, and mechanics impacts the meta as much as players do, if not more. So
it's such a good argument, actually. I'm just like, I didn't think about that way before, but that is actually brilliant. I think that also ties into communication, though. That if the smaller alliances were able to effectively communicate just with each other, like for example of House Stark, DB, Camelot, Legion of Dawn, UPN, Mayhem, whatever, all of the small alliances had some like private channel. Because I know the big dogs, they do. They have like these sort of super block servers, or they have these group chats. And
I will say that's not as that's not. They don't
it's
have
not
group
as
chats.
close.
It's a flow of information. Everyone talks one to one, and then that sort of circles around, and people
Yeah.
talk back and forth.
The lower tier
There's
has
not
their
that many
network
like
too, but the
yeah,
alliances that are somewhere in between do not. And
some of them do.
information
I
sometimes
think.
will pass through the lower tier, but not up. Well, I mean, House Stark,
Well,
for instance, should have that network. They have every reason to
yeah.
have that network, and I
Well,
know
House Stark
that.
is one of the. Yeah.
I was going to
Yeah,
say
that's
one of
fair.
the few that don't. I don't think they do because they might have connections to Bellini and like KT and stuff. They might have a few connections here and there, but they don't do
Yeah.
any outreach. For example, with us, I know they have very few communications with DB and LOD, proportionate to what they should have. It's kind
Well,
of
the thing you
ridiculous.
have to understand about that is this where it circles back to skill issue. People just don't play the like. at the end of the day, like, I'll use Lysander as an example. If there's anybody on this show that I'm willing to roast ruthlessly with no reservations, it's Lysander. Sorry, Lysander, I don't actually hate you, but it's fun. So, Lysander is the most wasted opportunity of an FA head I've ever seen in my life. He is the leader of a major news network, which, however you slice it, that's a position that could be used he could leverage that. And obviously, it doesn't help that his line sucks. Like, how suck is not good. But he could use that. And instead, what does he do? His move is to sign Allen. He literally took House Stark, an alliance that was not very well respected, but it was kind of a third tier, like, macro. And he made them a micro and injected them into micro politics, which is mind-bogglingly stupid to me. And this is the guy who runs a news network, and he can't get allies. I just don't understand it. Like, and I know part of it is that their alliance isn't good. Like, one thing I noticed about House Stark. This is the new topic, House Stark. That's what it. So
All right.
after we rolled House Stark, they sat on full mill for like months.
I remember.
And like, I know that their position was like tentative, I guess, but I don't think there was anyone like specifically going after them. And I think they're still high milled now. I'd have to check. But like, they don't grow at all. And they're an alliance that is in a position where growing is going to be important for them to stay relevant, because they're at that point where they're about to fall off the edge of the earth, so to speak, right? Like, they're about to fall into irrelevance because the minimum city count of sort of where the core fighting is going to get higher and higher and higher, and they're not moving up with it, and they're right on the edge. They're about to tip off and spill into irrelevance, and so they're more incentivized to grow than anybody, because if they don't, they're fucked. That's it. They're just numbers for numbers for numbers for like they're a peripheral DB right now, effectively, positionally. I don't know what the relation with that is. I don't know the context personally. So I don't care. I don't talk to I talk to DB about our business. Whatever DB is doing with their thing, more power to them. I have no issues with it. But it's not my business. I don't get into it. But I don't know. I don't know what that's like, but that's their position right now. And this is an alliance that at one point was at least a player on the level of like CTO.
Yeah. I mean, they were almost on our level for a bit there. They were kind of considered like the chief of the syndicate protectorates, or syndicate peripherals. They had a lot of power and authority, or responsibility. But I actually had an idea and then I've lost it. But they're in a weird position because they could be doing more and they're not. They had City 30s when we had none. That was another wild component of their growth. They're at 60% militarization. That was what I was checking.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's my point. And it's like, I just don't get it. The other thing too is, this is the point you say about they could be doing more. This is why I remember a while back when we first signed that big map. I remember reading, I think it was Darth Ataxia, making this big post about how people need to do stuff and how it was like crazy that they signed this map. And I was just reading it, and I'm like, are you serious right now? How Stark is trying to lecture people on doing things in the game. Like, where do you get off criticizing anyone? It's insane to me that that's what they thought was a smart. I mean, it might have got him a little bit of clout for like 10 seconds, but then everyone forgets about it. I'm probably the only one who remembers that post even happened.
I remember having a debate with them over alliance centrism, which was a wild thing at the time, because at the time they were trying to do it initially, right? So Partisan had just proposed it, and then they were trying to like split off and stuff. But they were lecturing us, and we were paperless.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, alliance centrism. Look, if you want a simplified response to alliance centrism, it would be this: every single alliance that has thus far tried to attempt it has failed. that should tell you everything that you need to know. Alliance, like, I guess the only success story is KT, and KT, like, KT's strategy. I've talked to Valeni about this. We have a funny relationship because I've criticised his FA decisions at times publicly. We're obviously allies now, so things are a bit better than they were. But KT's strategy, effectively, whether it's conscious or unconscious, I think it's conscious. I don't know, but has been to sort of bounce between winning fights, which you could say that's an AA centric decision, right? They don't adhere to a block. They make decisions on their own, and those decisions are join the winning fight. That doesn't impact the flow of the game. To me, personally, and again, it's different for everyone. Everyone has different, I guess, metrics. So I'm only speaking for me, but from my perspective, how you measure the success of an alliance, there are other factors like their performance, etc. But how successful I think they are, and how important they are, and how much they're doing, its impact. It's how much have they changed the flow of the game? How much have they impacted the outcomes of alliances? Is one of the main metrics I use, and bouncing between winners doesn't do that at all. At best, you could say they provide the numbers that secures a side, but that's still so small in
I'd
comparison
like to
to
provide
any
a
sort of
counter
shaping.
argument. I don't like alliance
What would you?
centrism. I don't like alliance centrism as an ideology because I think it was created by Partisan for his tangled web, whatever.
Yes, it was. Yes.
But I like the independent foreign policy that we applied, and essentially that derived from a few principles that changed. So originally we were looking at the Sphere game. This was after 2021 when we got like obliterated into the top 50, and we were like, well, do we care about the spheres? Not really. We care about survival. And so the priority became whatever helped us independently as an alliance. And then we continued that until we realized that if a hegemony ever actually formed, then we would be the first to go. And so we had to loosely, with the minimal power that we had to affect it, discourage cooperation between spheres. But we were like, maybe you don't want to form a hegemony, you know? Maybe you don't want to create this bipolar sphere, because the larger the spheres got, the worse odds we had. But then over time, as we became like more powerful, then we realized, well, now we don't have to focus on survival so much. Now we can focus on like sphere things as well. And but at the same time, like our ability to impact the game right now is still really, really limited. And I was shocked earlier when you said stuff about like the idea that these generals of these smaller alliances could be persuaded. And I was like, shit, you're right. But even I'm like not that able to be persuaded right now. So that doesn't speak well of
the
things.
issue is that they should be able to be persuaded, but people are very locked into their like the problem. Here's the problem: when everyone is playing an individual game, none of them they're because you're putting your priorities first all the time. That locks down moves more than it opens up doors. Sometimes you have to eat a little shit and say, okay, this isn't the best move for me, but it helps me in a longer term thing. This isn't my beef, but by signing on to this, I gain XYZ. You also have to look at it from a perspective, like every decision you make in the game it's a combination of different things. It's not just beef. Like fighting alongside people builds bonds and it builds connections as much as fighting against people does. Having enemies, people used to bond. I say used to because they don't really anymore. They used to bond over mutual enemies a lot more, and I think that's missing in the game. The other thing too is there are not enough alliances that pursue revenge when they should. I'll use a good example of this. Another alliance that I'm criticizing a little bit is TI. TI, in my opinion, sort of conversely to the argument I'm making now, but TI made a big mistake in their priorities, in my opinion, which is they 100% should have, from the moment the Midgard disbanded, their priority should have been finding who was aligned against Aurora and focusing on. That should have been what they'd done.
Mm.
If they had done that, they would have been in a better position. Because they tried to play a more laid-back game and didn't pursue a revenge, there are a couple of problems with not pursuing revenge. If you don't pursue revenge, people will, and you're too casual about things, people will target you knowing that there won't be long-term consequences. People know you come after this thing, we are like a dog on a bone. We will chase you. We will punish you for that decision. And we're not concerned about our personal safety or such in pursuing that goal. It'll happen. There will be a loss that will take place as a result of the decision you made. And TS just found that out, and it is what it is. But if you play this laid back, you can't always reset. Sometimes you have to roll the people who rolled you. If you're going to reset with someone, there has to be something you gain in return to make that worth it, is my opinion. There has to be a mutual... It depends on the beef too. If a beef is mutual, like if I fucked you and then you fuck me, then it's easier, I think, to reset. But if you fucked me repeatedly and I haven't really done anything to you, then it's on you to come with the goods. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I had a similar debate with Rose Shadow Gov member, who shall not be named, because when I took over Cam, I wanted to reset with lots of people because the logic was some of the alliances on the other side were so vicious. They were absolutely ruthless to a degree where like they should not have been in the game, and we realized that if we pursued revenge, they would come at us until there was nothing left. Like it was scorched earth.
Yeah.
They wanted that excuse. And so at the time we were like, we just gotta let everything go. It doesn't matter how many... They proxied us for 2 years straight. Permanently. We had like people... I think I had like no spies for 3 years. I still have no spies. They're still spying me. But there were people that like really scorched earth us. And like sub 2k in for 2 or whatever years. And even now, they will occasionally roll us with City 50s. You've seen it occasionally because you've had to counter them. And it's tough, right? Like, we can pursue revenge in that instance, but they're just so vicious. Like, it's not worth doing.
Well, I'll make an amendment on my argument, which is you have to take in consideration the context. If you can't get, like, for example, I'm of the opinion that Grumpy has made a mistake in always focusing Eclipse and not being like. But at the same time, they also made a mistake by fighting Rose. So it's you have to make the right decision at the right time. Like,
you gotta pick your enemies.
That it was a mistake.
Pick your battles.
Yes, exactly. You have to be smart about when you want to fight someone, and you have to. Sometimes you can't fight everyone. Here's the reality: we came out of Dodge this with beefs with everyone. We had so many beefs. And like, this is why Shiho said this on the forums. He mentioned that we had like a huge list of beefs. He was right, which is why I found it funny that he also thought that we were like locked in on TS. He had a lot of reasons to go after almost everyone. Pretty much anyone who wasn't on our side in that war, we had some justification, but we had to choose our battles, and we had to, bury some of those beefs and just accept that, like, it's just not worth to fight every one of them and be selective. And so, initially, the people that we chose to respond to in that scenario was Aurora, because Aurora continued to cause problem for us after that war. After we were rolled by Sale, it became TS, because TS kind of interjected themselves into that and made themselves the beef, I guess. You have to pick your battles. Like, on the same token that Grumpy shouldn't have hit Rose, I think Grumpy also shouldn't have tried to hit Eclipse again after One Day War. I think that was the time to go, all right, we've tried this, it's not worked. Let's reevaluate. Let's find a different path. Let's fight someone else. Try to make you need to make decisions that are going to gain you more friends than enemies. In general, that's how you need to look at things. And this is the problem: is people think that you can't reset with everyone because people take notice when you reset with someone, and so like when you reset with someone else's enemy or you have a good relationship with them, that automatically gives you a worse relationship with their rival. Like all the
Yeah.
people, if someone like 6 months ago when we were building up, not 6 months ago, 3 months ago, or how long's it been before, when we were building the coalition to hit Syndicate this last war, if someone had said to me in that period, we like Syndicate, we're good with
Mm.
Syndicate, my immediate reaction would be to like you less because you're aligned or at least you're good with my primary rival. Now it's like everything's up in the air. I don't know who's our rival going to be. It could be TS again. If I was a
Yeah.
betting man, that would be where I bet. But you
It's
never
worth
know.
articulating that actually for newer people, especially because smaller alliances aren't taught that. I was never taught that, and we paid a huge price for that.
Yeah,
Which is that essentially, if you pursue rapprochement or you try and reconcile with the enemy that your alliances have come together to fight, you and your allies. If you pursue rapprochement, then you gain some more agency. Right, you're not as dependent on your ally anymore.
right.
But
But you also
that
lose
treaty becomes weaker.
relationship. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
and
bond. Yes,
inversely,
exactly.
if you are way more hostile to your opponent, then you're actually increasing your dependency on your ally, and they can
Correct.
use
Yeah.
that and take advantage of you.
Yeah.
And
The thing is,
yeah,
that's not a big deal now because we're in multipolar world. So there's always other options for smaller alliances. That was much more
mm,
of a problem in bipolarity. This is how bipolarity
even mini
worked: is the
spheres.
larger alliances stoked drama between the smaller ones to keep them on the one side. That's what they would
Mm,
always do, and it would escalate and escalate. And so all of the smaller alliances also had beef with other alliances on the other side, and it was just this self-perpetuating system. But now you have multipolarity. So let's say I'm allied to an alliance, and that alliance, and I'm locked into a rivalry with someone, and that alliance starts to, work more with like my rival or whatever. Yeah. Well, sorry. Let's say that alliance has more beef with my rival and starts to talk shit about them and gets into conflict with them more. Yeah, you could say that now they're more likely to stay with me, they become more dependent, but they could also just leave and go somewhere else and try and prosecute that there. And in many cases, they'd be better off doing so. I mean, TGH is a great example of this.
mm.
TGH didn't like Syndicate, but they still left us and went to Rose. Like that's just
Yes.
one example. You could find many other examples. So it's
Mm.
not you're not locked in one sphere if you
I
have
think
beef. And
in mini spheres, no, sorry, in multipolarity, you're right, but in mini spheres, I think it was much much worse than even bipolarity, because in mini spheres, there were so many alliances that were just like plainly sacrificed by allies. Camel
yeah,
was not the only
yeah. I
one.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
mini spheres had the impact. See, I don't know. I would actually. I'll make the Steelman argument against your point in a second, but
Okay.
I'll first agree with you that yeah, when we had mini spheres, because the meta was to keep those spheres small, alliances would get cut if they weren't up to snuff. And that's how, like, what was it, Swamp and Oasis and Midgard and all these
Mm.
alliance like groups came together. And you could definitely make the argument that that was not great. But for me personally, my argument is the best alliances should succeed more than the worst alliances. And that a lot of those alliances have issues that cause that to happen. It's on
Mm.
you to improve your alliance and get like you have other issues because you've had like political targeting and etc.
Yeah.
But like again, it's more about there are a lot of these extra alliances that could be doing more to improve their alliance and could be bringing people in. help them or to do all sorts of things, but they're resistant to change and they're just content to go along. And like, there's a certain phenomenon, like thing that happens. I call them like hangout alliances. They're basically just alliances that a bunch of people gather together for social reasons. They're not as popular now as they used to be, but I think to some extent, some of the older alliances are just that with
there are
extras
few.
on top.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
and
like the
it's like,
coalition, Charming Friends, Akatsuki, which is around now. There's still a lot of them actually.
yeah, there's a fair few of them, and I think those alliances. The problem I've always had with those alliances is that if a social group is strong, you don't need a social alliance. You can just make a group, like you can just make a Discord channel and chat in that Discord channel. There's no actual reason to build an alliance around a social group and then only have that social group be the alliance and then never try and do anything in the game, because all you're really doing is trying to keep the social group together. Because what happens a lot of the time is you'll just have shit members who are part of a social group, and so they stay in the alliance because they're a shit member. If you're in Sing, look, I could fucking love you. I could think you're the fucking funniest, most enjoyable person ever, but you better log in. You better declare wars, or bye-bye, I'll enjoy you from afar, you know? Like, we're a competitive alliance. And to me, that's fine, because we're clear about that with people, that we're playing the game. We're not building... We are building a community, but the game comes first, is the mindset. We have our community is pretty strong. There's a lot of activity, but the game is the priority.